Today's lesson concerns characters. Now, all of this information that I'm going to talk about today comes from Barthes' first guide, which is Publishable Characters. It is 50,000 words long, so I'm going to cover what I think is the most essential and necessary chunk today. I encourage you to read it. I think it's wonderful. What can I say? I worked very hard on it. All right. I worked hard to make sure it was clear, right? And we also tested everything in it, part of the information we're going to be seeing today. But if you want a more thorough treatment of character, go ahead, read this book, and I'm happy to answer any thoughts or questions. Oh, good. Rosemary just got it. Excellent. Thank you. So why characters, right? We have 5 elements to story. Today, we're going to start off with character. Sequence is important. Why did we pick this one to go first? Well, one of the primary deliverables of your novel is the empathy you create between the reader and the main character. It's so important that this is part of the value triangle we're going to talk about next time, right? The main reason for satisfaction, which Michael just alluded to, is that there's some kind of bond that develops between the main character and the reader that cements a relationship that is going to be lived vicariously and be ultimately very satisfying. Characters are important. It's a short way of saying that. Perhaps the signal feature of the novel is access to the character's internality. Then, if that's true, if you want to generate satisfaction and you're choosing what to spend your words on, the best bet is to put your words on character, on the character's lived choices, right? The situations they're in, the decisions they face, what they decide to do, and the consequences. That is the nexus of empathy. I'm not going to talk about that so much today, but there's a huge chunk of the book devoted to that. And then finally, you get this bonus. It's easier to write character-driven novels. Why? Human beings have been living with other human beings for hundreds of thousands of years. And as a result, our brains have developed to get along with other people. You've heard this phrase, people are social animals. It's true for primates. It's especially true for humans. We live in groups. Dealing with groups is sort of our #1 priority. And our experience dealing with other humans can be translated directly into our writing. And that is why characters are easier to write. Character-driven novels are easier to write. So we're going to start off this interrogation of character with a very simple fact. I want you to think about some real people. So we're going to think about Celeste and Abraham Lincoln. Now we're going to compare them to some fictional characters. So the one I have is Sherlock Holmes because he's copyright free apparently. And I don't know who this is, but I'm pretty sure it's the woman from Pride and Prejudice, Miss Darcy. Can't remember her name. Anyway, Jane Darcy, we'll call her. Jane Bennett. No, Elizabeth Bennett. I got it. Yay. Here's the thing. Whether someone is real or fictional, our brain treats them exactly the same way. It's an identical mental model. And that's astonishing, right? You can barely tell someone is fictional. If I ask you questions about a fictional character or a real person, you're going to use the same brain mechanism to answer them. And we call that brain mechanism a mental model. Let me just say it again. We relate to fictional beings exactly as we relate to real people. If we're doing our job as authors, these fictional beings, your characters, become real in their minds. So let's prove that point. Think about everyone you know. Think about Spider-Man versus your best friend. And think about the last novel you read. In nearly every case, you're going to know that novel's character better than you know your best friend. Again, because you have access to their internal thoughts. And you don't have that, right? Even our closest friends, our partners, are mysteries to us in some ways. Right? That's why we get divorced. But, right, with a fictional character, if the author's doing their job well, we know them nearly perfectly. So much so that our identities overlap. And we reach this state of perfect empathy that we call grokking, after Robert Heinlein's term. Another example, I want you to look over my shoulder. You can't see him, he's in the corner there. You see George, right? I can ask him a question. George, how you doing? Happy, sad, hot, cold, bored, whatever. And my brain will supply an answer. My answer is, I'm fine. I'm just hanging out, relaxing, listening to your talk. That's how powerful our brain person perception mechanism is we can anthropomorphize nearly everything. I can anthropomorphize my phone, my car. Pet rocks were a big fad in the 70s. All it took was 2 eyes on a piece of rock and you could talk to it. And that is an example of how easy it is for us to think of non-real things as people. George is, sorry, George, he's just a bunch of cloth and stuffing and some eyes. And yet, I can imbue him and relate to him as a real person effortlessly. Effortlessly. And that's how easy it is for people to form a nascent relationship with your characters. And all of this depends on simulacra. Simulacra are a model of the person in your head, fictional or real, rock or human. And then that mental model, the reason why it exists, right? It's called an evolved cognitive structure, perhaps, right? Helps us get along in the world. When you say you know a person, I really know that person. What you're really saying is that that mental model in your head is well developed. There is a lot of information packed into that mental model. Now, why not just make a file cabinet or a Rolodex, right? Or Post-its or a presse? Why is it a model? It's a model because that thing in your head comes to life. It comes to life in your imagination so that they can interact with you and you can observe their behavior. Why is this useful? Well, let's say I want dinner, right? I'm tired. How can I convince my partner to do the cooking tonight? It's a challenge, right? So I have my model and I'm going to ask that model this question. Hey, you want to cook tonight? And the model's going to give me a response. Now, the model might say, hell no. So I'm going to come back and ask that model a different question. I'm so tired. I really wish someone would cook for me. Then the model is going to say, oh, I feel sorry. Don't worry about it. I'll take care of it. I could ask it a different way. Hey, model, what do you think about me cooking tomorrow and you can handle the cooking tonight? The model's going to go, yeah, it seems fair, right? Or maybe not. I don't think that's fair. I think we should cook together. That model contains enough information that you can simulate that person and try to predict their answers. It's really an amazing faculty. So, as authors, we're going to take advantage of this faculty to create our fictional characters. And if you follow through the logic, there's really only 2 things you need to do to establish what people call an engaging character. I'm going to call it a publishable character, one that readers are going to find worth reading about and that's going to lead to a satisfying novel. The first is authenticity. Your character, as you present them in your words, has to be relatable as a real person. Second criteria is they have to be investable. The reader has to put time and energy into developing that mental model. In other words, they have to be worth reading about. And here's the kicker. 1 is surprisingly easy, and 2 is ridiculously hard. It's the opposite of what most people think. Front load my character, introduce them in chapter 1. That's it, right? My character's done. No. The introduction is important, but it's very easy to accomplish. The hard part is to get the reader to come to know the character and empathize with them, see them develop and change an arc over the course of the novel, and have that payoff. That's what we're going to focus on. Why is authenticity easy? Well, refer back to the previous slide or two, right? Spinning up a simulacrum is so fast and so quick, we do it in microseconds, right? You show me a new stuffed animal, I can come up with a simulacrum from them instantaneously. The only thing that can go wrong is if you do such a poor job introducing them that people don't recognize that they're a being. And that happens extremely rarely. Now, the simulacrum may not be great, right? And it may not fit or advance your story, that we can talk about later, but it's very easy for someone to be authentic. Quick test, right? Have someone read your chapter and then have them make a prediction about how that person would behave. What did you have for breakfast, Spider-Man? Well, I had bacon and eggs, right? If they can answer any question about your character, authenticity has been established. Investment, on the other hand, is super hard, right? Investment means they have to build that model over the course of your novel, investing time and energy, and most importantly, interacting with that model so that they can make predictions about the character's behavior. Right? The model is constantly active in the background as they're reading. And that means it's developing when they find new information, and it means they're kind of using it as they read along with it and experiencing the novel. And to keep that interaction going, to keep that model growing and active and contributing to the experience, that's the focus of your efforts. Now, to say this more precisely, the readers are investing time and energy. That is going to create empathy, which is the #1 contributor to overall novel satisfaction, right? The way to do that is through this chain. You're constantly going to be presenting choices to the reader and character. Remember, grokking is perfect empathy. There's a merging between the reader and the character so that when the character is faced with a choice, the reader is making the same choice. And usually this falls under the heading of agency. You want the character being active in making choices. And that's important, absolutely. But what that misses out on is that that is the foundation for empathy. It's not so much that they're spectating the reader's actions as they might in a movie. It's because their minds are joining with the reader so that they can experience those choices. And we test this, we're going to talk about this in the future, by retelling. So your goal in a choice situation is for the reader to be able to recount the options. They need to understand that's a choice. And once they see that, they're going to automatically interrogate the simulation and make a prediction. And then if you're constructing a situation properly, there's going to be some kind of consequence after that. And the way you see if there's a consequence is if there's an observable emotion, right? The character made a mistake, or the character made the right choice, or the character did what? Whatever the character chooses has to have a consequence that's going to be observed in an emotion. That's the test to see if you have established and are maintaining empathy, which again requires investment. So how do you get people to invest? Well, it's hard, right? People have a lot to do in their lives. Doom scroll, ADD, all those maladies of contemporary society. What you're looking to do is to create some kind of overlap or resonance. right? You want the reader and character to come together. And there's really only two ways to do that. The first is some kind of identity, right? A shared identity. And this does, they're easy ones, right? I'm a semi-retired old man, right? I like curmudgeonly characters, especially if they're in outer space. Dungeon crawler Carl, perfect for me, right? We Are Bob. Can't remember what the title is. We Are Legion, We Are Bob. Curmudgeonly, old man's war. Right? These are right up my alley. Gobble them up. That's going to be different than everyone, right? Teenage girls, high schoolers, whatever. You can think about it demographically, and that's important. But what I want to encourage you to do is think about a more abstract identity. So the leading example here is E.T. You might not remember him anymore, but he was an ugly-looking puppet, almost George, right? And yet we empathized with him. Why? Well, he was, experiencing things we all experience. He was lost, he was alone, he wanted to get home, right? Those feelings that he had, the affection for his adopted family, were part of his identity as a fictional being who became real to us. And that overlap in identity, shading into situation, is what created that empathy. You can create empathy with nearly everybody. The cliche is villains are people too, right? What that means is there's an overlap in identity or situation that's going to give rise to empathy. So turning more specifically to situations, what we want is something recognizable. You may be careening through space in a spaceship. You may be solving a murder in Victorian England. You may be a prehistoric cave dweller who's just discovered fire, right? Each of those situations, though extremely far, very removed from our ordinary lives, still will get that tingle of recognition. The spaceship crashes. I've been in an auto accident, right? I've discovered fire. Well, I figured out how to work my iPhone, right? I am in a Victorian murder mystery, and yet I'm still drinking coffee and have to be interrogated by the police. It's that recognition of a situation that then pulls the reader in and begins that path toward empathy. So what's the takeaway here? The most important takeaway is that identity comes first, right? The simulacra are all about identity, right? You are forming a mental model that is equivalent to that person's identity. So the things we don't want to do are backstory, complexity, and flaws. Oh, you need a good, authentic character? Make a lot of backstory. No. Remember, a character is super easy to render authentic, right? You don't need backstory. You just need an instantaneous introduction. Complication. I'm going to make my character more complicated by adding details. That's a big no-no, right? You'll see we explicitly discourage that in a second. Instead, you want to just present that person as a holistic being. It takes very few details to do that, not some giant complicated exposition dump at the beginning, and then you layer on more details over time. And then there's well, give them a flaw, right? That'll make them real. If you're only tacking along another detail that happens to be a flaw, it's really not going to help you. So what should you do? You should build an identity for your fictional being as a whole persona. Even if they're an alien, they're still going to be human to us. Can't help it, right? And then we want that whole being to exhibit organic behavior. That is what we are doing in our storytelling and in our writing. So the watchword is to be careful. You have to be especially careful about introductions, and then you have to be especially careful about building an arc. Now, just a preview, because it shades into plot, An arc is just a series of situated choices that lead to a new identity and that produces empathy. Right? So the character in a novel is a series of events, that's its plot, and each of those events can be construed as a choice that the character is making. That builds an agency, right? And then every time those choices occur, the reader is vicariously experiencing them and enjoying the novel, right? And then those choices are going to slowly change over time. The character at the end of the novel is not going to make the same choices for a given situation as the character at the beginning of a novel. And that's what we call an arc. Their identity is literally changing. And that change is both seen in and prompted by different situations, different choices in the same situation. All right. So how do we create this identity? Well, there's a 3-step recipe. It's quite easy to do. The first is our character equation, which I'll talk about in more detail, which is just a basic set of ingredients. Then we're going to use our comprehensive character developer to add only relevant aspects. I've underlined the word relevant, so it discourages you from massive backstory and overcomplication and throwing in a flaw. And then the most important part that most people miss is we're going to blend them to an integrated being. Let's talk about the character equation first. There's 3 ingredients here: parts of yourself, cultural knowledge, and what we're calling reference. The idea is all 3 of these are going to be put together to produce a unique fictional being. Let's talk about each of them in turn. First, parts of yourself. I guess the negative example is a Mary Sue, right? You have some alter ego of yourself that goes through the novel experiencing all kinds of wonders and ample fame and reward. Don't do that. On the other hand, it's impossible not to have pieces of yourself in your main characters. So what we want to do is take advantage of that, right? Use your sense of humor, use your experience, right? If you were a trained nurse or doctor, you're going to be better off minding a medical drama. So we want to take what we can take out of ourselves and put them into the character. But the character is not us. The character is partially us, or more accurately, part of us is in that character. So we have to choose consciously and very carefully what parts of us we are going to put into our characters. And then we need to take that whole slice. And I'll talk about this more when we talk about reference. So think about who you are and who the character is. Think about that intersection very precisely and make sure those elements are in that character and no more. Cultural knowledge. So this is where co-creation comes in, right? The reader has a whole encyclopedic knowledge of human beings. They've met every type, kind, shape, size, whatever, either directly or indirectly through our culture, media, right? Their other reading. And you want to take advantage of those stereotypes and archetypes. And the key thing is that it takes very few words to trigger an archetype, right? This guy's a cowboy, that guy's a farmer. Instantaneously, a whole flood of information comes in. I can describe their clothes, right? I can describe what they had for breakfast. I can describe their attitude toward life. All of these from just that one little label. This person's a warrior. This person's a trickster. This person's a healer, a mentor, right? Those are archetypes. Again, a whole flood of information from 1 or 2 words. Very efficient, right? The readers bring all this information to your character. On the other hand, you have to be careful, right? You don't want it to be just a stereotype. Stereotypes are one of the 3 components of your characters. So you can't let that overwhelm their identity. Again, you have to be careful. You have to anticipate exactly how the reader is going to react to your introduction, and then be able to provide the foundation for building on that model throughout your novel. And that's where the retelling test comes in. So the point of this exercise is you're building the core of the character, and then you're making sure that that core spins up a matching simulation in the reader's mind so that they can start that foundation for getting to know and empathize with the character. And then the last part is what we call stolen distinctives. Right? You want your character to be unique, but instead of adding a flaw or a complication or backstory, what you're going to do is figure out what you can add to that character to make them unique. A third, essentially, that you're going to put in there that's going to become part of their whole being. The easiest way to do this is to find someone you know really well and steal, right? So this character has my dad's sense of humor, or this character reminds me of Superman, or this character, whatever, right? Find a specific person that you know and steal something from them. Again, be very precise about what you're stealing. We don't want this to be willy-nilly. On the other hand, we don't want it to be imagined, right? Oh, I'm going to imagine what it's like to be a cook and how they cook in the kitchen. Not what you want to steal. What you want to do is you want to find an actual cook. There's plenty of examples. The Bear, Emeril Lagasse, I don't know, is Martha Stewart a cook? Right? You find a cook, you observe them very carefully, and then you steal the aspect of them that you want to include in your character. By doing that, it's going to be real to your readers. Real in the sense that what they are doing matches something that actually happens in the real world. And again, it can be far afield. You can have a cook on a spaceship, or an alien cook, or a cave dweller cook, right? There's something about their cookedness that you're going to steal, from an actual cook. And then you're going to import that into your character. And there you have the 3 basic ingredients. So the second step is adding detail. Right now, we've developed this comprehensive character developer. It's going to be part of your lab assignment this week. It's pretty self-explanatory. There's plenty of instructions. So go there and try it out. But I'm going to give you some meta instructions, right? The idea here is to develop your core first and expand on those 3 basic ingredients. Now, there's 73 potential specifics, more than any other character developer we've seen, right? But every specific you add has to be story relevant, not too many, right? The worst thing you can do is come up with a laundry list of details, a backstory, if you will, and present that to the reader as if it's a person. It's not. It's a list of details. Right? We're using this to fill in the being we've established in the 3 ingredients we just discussed. We're only adding relevant details to anticipate the blending and help fill them in as a person. Not too many, right? And then the character developer will print out a PDF for you, basically a profile of that character, like a Dungeons and Dragons sheet, right? Some people misuse the character developer and produce an 8-page PDF because they insisted on checking off every one of the 73 potential specifics. Pick and choose. Pick the ones that are going to be relevant to your story, interesting, and therefore spur investment. Right? So your PDF should be about 3 pages, not 8. Okay. Now, a quick way to tell if a detail is relevant or not is what we call the gossip test. First of all, gossip is a great thing, right? It's part of that human faculty for relating to other people, right? Gossip makes our lives easier. Stay away from that person. You can trust that person. That's the basic function of gossip. And then auxiliary functions are that dinner question, right? Well, this person's into trading. If you offer them quid pro quo, you're probably going to get them to agree. Oh, this person cares about her dog. So as long as you say, oh, your dog's beautiful, they'll do anything you want, right? That gossip is a way of getting along with other people. And we want to use that faculty to help us produce publishable characters. Now, the key thing about gossip is it's very short, it's immediate, and it's salient, right? In other words, it is context dependent, right? So the best way to think about this is you're at a party, right, talking to a good friend, someone you trust and are willing to be completely honest with, and that character walks into the party. So in that situation, what can you say about that character in 1 or 2 sentences that's going to describe the context so the person you're gossiping with can understand the person and how they're about to behave, right? So if a detail is good enough to include in gossip, right, that brief, very brief section you have to introduce a person behind their back, then it's relevant. And if it fails the gossip test, it's not relevant and therefore doesn't need to be in your story, at least at the moment. So let me illustrate. When you're introducing your character, you have maybe 1 or 2 sentences in the first chapter. You want to use the gossip test to pick out the very most salient things that the reader absolutely has to know right then and there about that character to get that simulation moving on the right track. And nothing else, right? Everything else is irrelevant. Okay. Finally, we come to blending, and this is the part that most people miss, right? We want our characters to be people in the sense that the mental model is active, whole, and fully developed. And the only way to do that is by interacting with them. For example, you have a dialogue, right? How's it going, George? Right? I happen to know George because he was the star of a TV show in my childhood, right? But that model is well enough developed that I can interact with it, have a little adventure, right? Spontaneously. If the model wasn't so developed, it was new, I'd still do the same thing. You know, what's up? What do you plan on doing today? You interact with that whole being in your mind to have it, right? To develop it so it's there. And when this being is set in your mind through this dialogue, then you'll be able to write organically. So here's something we do in our directed writing groups. It's a great blending exercise. You have your, remember, 2-page PDFs. You hand them to 2 of your peers, colleagues. They become that character for the purposes of a scene. Then the author is given a chance to set the scene. How do they do that? Well, they tell the story. They give their MCS, the background story, and then they give the stage directions, right? What's the situation? Especially what the character's goals are in that situation, right? You should write it well enough that that is going to be apparent. Then they act out the scene, right? And you watch them, you observe how well they do. The question is, are their behaviors organic? Is there enough information in that PDF that they've been able to form a whole image of the being in their head and then use that complete model to act out the scene in a way that corresponds to what you're doing as an author? So you may have to rewind that and think about that sentence a few times, right? But the idea, again, is that there's a whole being that is transferred from your mind through the PDF sheet into the actor's head. And then with the context, right, the story and the situation, they're able to act out that scene. And then, of course, you want that scene to progress the story. Their actions should reflect who they are at the moment and then sort of point the way to who they're going to be going forward. So here's your lab assignment for next week. Google Sheet, right? We want 2 characters, each of their 3 ingredients. So you're going to do the parts of yourself, the stereotypes and archetypes, and whatever you steal for distinctiveness from other people. And that's going to go in the sheet so we can review it and use it in our labs next week. And then only once you've done that and given it time to reflect, then you can go to the character developer, the URL we saw, and add the relevant details and start your blending process. Do not start with the developer and adding details, right? It's no, I can't say that. It's backward, right? You want to think about who that person is before you start adding details. And you'll see that this produces much, much, much better publishable characters because the authenticity is sort of assumed, and we're going to work on their identity, which is then going to prompt investment.
Barty delivers the tools, guidance, and support you need to produce compelling novels. Our well-researched and thoroughly tested approach includes our minimum complete story, a 90-second exercise that keeps your writing on track while fueling creativity, Barty Publishability Index, a 23-dimension checklist that offers attainable goals and provides actionable feedback, and our brand new comprehensive character developer that helps you construct unforgettable characters. Come see for yourself at Bartsy.com today. Try our workshop or enter our first chapter contest. Then, when you're ready, Elite Membership delivers writing groups, personal coaching, and a curated community. With Bartsy, your work will captivate everyone, from agents to publishers, and, most importantly, your readers.